This Christian YouTuber says there's no Book of Mormon archaeology. Let's get into it. I was just scrolling around on YouTube and this video popped up from James Rebuck. Is that how you pronounce it? Yeah, so I got this video from James Rebuck and I went ahead and watched it. I thought it was interesting. I wasn't sure at first if it was going to be in favor of the Book of Mormon or not, but then as I got to watch, he proceeded to talk about the Smithsonian statement on the Book of Mormon, like that's a source of truth. Now, if you're a believer in archaeology and science and scientific methods, then I totally understand why you would think that the Smithsonian is the end all on any kind of archaeology or scientific statements about ancient civilizations, because they've established themselves and they have lots of credible professionals. The only challenge here is that the Smithsonian has some I would say it's a checkered past in regards to how they treat some of these findings that they have, and we'll get into this. But let's do like my friend here, James Rebuck, has done, and we're gonna pull up the archaeology statement, or at least the Smithsonian statement regarding the Book of Mormon. And it's all broken up. It's not too long. It's about like 9 different things here. We'll read it just like my friend James did. Okay, we've got the Smithsonian Institute statement regarding the Book of Mormon. We're going to read it step by step. Some Latter-day Saints, in their zeal to give tangible authenticity to the Book of Mormon, have told prospective converts that the Smithsonian Institute has used the Book of Mormon to verify sites in the New World. In response to numerous requests on this subject, the Smithsonian has issued the following paper detailing their position on the matter. Statement regarding the Book of Mormon. 1. The Smithsonian Institution has never used the Book of Mormon in any way as a scientific guide. Smithsonian archaeologists see no direct connection between the archaeology of the New World and the subject matter of the book. Well, why would you? I mean, I think what James did, which was actually really good, in his video, he says that the Smithsonian is not, they're not Christians. And so with the fact that they're not Christians, they're not really going to be looking for evidence at any point, really, of an existence of a God. And, the reason why he said it in his video is basically they don't believe in God. And so, when they talk about the Bible, I guess, let me put it this way. James went ahead and mentioned that they're not Christians, and maybe it was to support their statements of basically they have more evidence of Christian documents from the old world than they do even of Egyptian, basically, I guess, lifestyle and, practices and religious practices and such. So, maybe I'm, glazing over that a little bit, but the point is, he brought a good point up, and that is the Smithsonian is not Christian. And I think that that's also a really good point to bring up here too, is the Smithsonian isn't a Latter-day Saint. They're not Latter-day Saints. They're not Christian. They're not Latter-day Christians. So, and I think the challenge here is that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints does have a lot of records, and they keep those records to themselves. We don't discuss them. There are museums, but not a Book of Mormon museum. And in fact, the state of the church for the Latter-day Saints is that there isn't a definitive location that's been basically announced by the church. And I think there's a reason for this. But I'm not going to try and give, my own explanations. I'm just going to focus on what the Smithsonian says in this video, and I'm going to show basically the archaeology. So, again, we just went through the first part. Yeah, so why would the Smithsonian use it as a scientific guide? Has the Smithsonian used the Bible as a scientific guide? Number 2, the physical type of the American Indian is basically Mongoloid, Asian. being most closely related to that of the peoples of Eastern, Central, and Northeastern Asia. Archaeology, I have a hard time saying that. Archaeological evidence indicates that the ancestors of the present Indians came into the New World probably over a land bridge. They say probably, so they don't, I think it's probably the Asian population, but they still say probably, so they're not 100% certain. Known to have existed in the Bering Strait region during the last ice age, in a continuing series of small migrations beginning from about 25,000 to 30,000 years ago. Now remember, they're not Christian, so they believe in evolution. Now I have a little qualm here because James is using them as a source of truth, and he has acknowledged that they're not Christian, but what he hasn't done is he hasn't acknowledged that these migrations are completely way off. The Bible actually says that a day for the Lord or for God is that it's 1,000 years. So a day for God is 1,000 of our years. So when the Bible actually describes the earth being made in 6 days and man being made as part of one of those days, and he rested on the seventh day, well, that means that it's been 6,000 years. But we'll go ahead and continue. Present evidence indicates that the first people to reach this continent from the east were Norsemen, who briefly visited the northeastern part of North America around AD 1,000. Maybe I don't even know if I'm reading this right, but AD 1,000, and then settled in Greenland. There's nothing to show that they reached Mexico or Central America. So the problem here about LDS archaeology is that we're split. For many years, and there's good reason because of history in the church, and even enemies of the church, basically had placed the Book of Mormon in Central and South America. Yet the first missions to Native Americans, the first missions of the church were to Native Americans in North America. So what does that say about LDS archaeology? Well, again, it's split. One half of it believes the Book of Mormon took place in Central and South America, while the other half is growingly being persuaded that, or realizing that, it may have happened in North America. In fact, Nephi actually suggests this. In fact, I wouldn't say he suggests it. He basically plainly says that his family, everything would happen in North America. And the real kicker is when he describes that the Gentiles, when they come to the lands of his brethren and his family, when they come, they would be coming because they were looking to get away from the oppression of their mother Gentiles, and then that they would have a war with their mother Gentiles on land and on sea. It was the British that came and fought the Gentiles or the settlers of this new land, this new world. They fought them on land and on sea. But in Central and South America, the history is very different. See, because the Gentiles would win against them, and also it's described that they would be scattered. At no point in Mexican history had the natives been scattered like they were in North America. So those are just some important points to lay out. I skipped over this, but I do want to touch on just the origins of Native Americans. The problem here that the Smithsonian is done in number 2 is they haven't addressed that there are other DNA types in America. And, I could show just by easy example that the fact is that there's a lot more than Asian here in North America. And you can see it by when you look at the migration charts of, ancient peoples. There's specific haplogroup types, which are basically the marker of ancient DNA. There's A, B, C, and D, which are all Asian. They also, A, B, C, and D does also include Siberian. But there is another marker amongst Native Americans around the Great Lakes, and that's haplogroup X. Now, I've actually made some videos about haplogroup X. I've made videos about haplogroup R, which is also connected to Israel. Haplogroup X is also is one of the most identifiable markers that is absolutely connected to the Middle East. And the thing is about haplogroup X is many scientists, for some reason, think that they came across the Bering Strait as well, or that they came across the Bering, like alongside the Bering Strait, basically on the water through the Arctic. But the major problem with this is that the migration, like the maps where you find haplogroup X, and including R, is nowhere along the Bering Strait. See, because if you're traveling along the water, there's at some point where you're going to rest and stop, and you're going to probably have some of your people stay. In both maps relating to Native American DNA that's specifically identified as being Middle Eastern, does not have any markers along the Bering Strait. It's very clean. But Asians, they're all over the place along the Bering Strait. So it's a real clear indicator that Asian DNA did go across the Bering Strait, even down to South America, but at no point did these markers that are connected, haplogroup X and R, go at all along the Bering Strait. You know, if those, you could say there's two groups of people, Asians and also Middle Easterners, but the fact is that they still didn't behave like the Asians. So those are just some points here. So again, the Smithsonian is absolutely missing this new DNA or this new research on genetics for Native Americans. The other thing too is that they're focused on Central and South America. And again, the Latter-day Saint archaeology has been split, and it's been emerging I'd say since the early 2000s, or maybe mid 2010s. That's where this discovery or realization of LDS archaeology existing in North America has really started to grow. And here we are in 2024. So it's really gotten exciting, and that's why my channel exists, is because I have a lot of data and DNA and evidence and archaeology that I've just been showing on TikTok. I'm growing on Instagram, and here I am on YouTube. So let's go ahead and continue. One of the main lines of evidence supporting the scientific finding that contacts with old world civilizations, if needed, or if indeed they occurred at all, were of very little significance for the development of American Indian civilizations, is the fact that none of the principal old world domesticated food plants or animals except the dog occurred in the New World in pre-Columbian times. American Indians had no wheat, barley, oats, millet, rice, cattle, pigs, chickens, horses, donkeys, camels before 1492. Camels and horses were in the Americas, along with the bison, mammoth, and mastodon, but all of these animals became extinct around 10,000 BC. At the time, the early big game hunters spread across the Americas. Well, okay, this some might say is the nail in the coffin, but in actuality, there's a lot. So there are what's called inaccuratisms with the Book of Mormon. Some have said that there's up to 200 inaccuratisms, or maybe at least over 150. But now there's actually, there's definitely less than 50. I think it's about 20 or less inaccuratisms that have not still been addressed, while leaves the other 200 basically all resolved. So these anachronisms have all nearly been resolved, and it addresses just about all of these things. And I'm not as well versed in these elements. Some of this has been found in Central and South America. In fact, I have a good friend, he goes by Brother Rick on TikTok, that's actually addressed this. I'll leave in the description access to his TikTok where he addresses each one of these anachronisms, especially relating to food. One thing I can definitely say is that I've actually made videos on horses, and I have posted evidence of horses existing pre-Columbus and pre-1492. So I'll link to that also in the description, and you can even see it for yourself, just that there were a specific type of horse in North America that were found, and the Spanish actually didn't bring all of the horses as well. So that's really the exciting thing. Some of these Native American stories actually recount the fact that they had been working with horses, again, long before, 1492. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next number. Iron, steel, glass, and silk were not used in the New World before 1492, except for occasional use of smelting, meteoric iron. I'm not sure I'm saying that's right. Native copper was used in various locations in pre-Columbian times, but true metallurgy was limited to southern Mexico and the Andean region. I'm not sure if that's, I'll have to look that up and see what the Andean region is, if that is what I think it is. There's where its occurrence in late prehistoric times involved gold, silver, copper, and their alloys, but not iron. Interesting. Well, I have actually made a video about this as well. Iron actually has been found. In fact, early settlers in America, in fact, Heber C. Kimball being one of them, early Latter-day Saint and convert to the church, he actually has a book where he describes that he used to pick up iron on a regular basis out of his own property. Now, that's not evidence of basically iron being used, anciently, like it's described in the Book of Mormon. I just wanted to say that because of the fact that, hey, iron existed here, and it existed, basically here as a natural ore, and, unmolded or, not used to basically be made into anything. It just existed here, at least by the time of the 1800s. And they were like rocks, according to Heber C. Kimball in his own record. But what does count as ancient works of iron and metalwork is the fact that some of these ancient civilizations that existed in America, I'm talking about the Hopewell Mound Builders, a specific group of natives that is a mystery to many archaeologists, but have been identified to have existed between 600 BC all the way to 580. And I'm talking about their decline. They just stopped showing up in their, in some of their methods. They had mounds, they had artifacts. They, in fact, Native Americans say that they weren't the ones that built the mounds. It was an ancient people, a white race of people that existed before them, that they had wars with. In fact, the Seneca tribe described that they had many wars with them. They won against this group of people, basically wiping them out, and that they had records of their people, but they were written on metal plates and hidden in a hill. Interesting. But let me go ahead, again, for you, James, if you're watching this, I think it's important to note that this group of people fit exactly within Book of Mormon times. In fact, just to, dispel or just debunk basically what the Smithsonian is showing here, all I have to do is just prove that there were a group of people that spread across the continent that lived within Book of Mormon times, that had many wars, and had, basically everything that's listing here. So, I'm one by one debunking what's stated here. And, you might have a hard time believing that, but the fact is that this has all been done by non-LDS archaeologists and basically people who have the time and resources to research this. And they've been researching it a lot longer than Latter-day Saints have, because we've only really been excited about this since, the 2010s, even though a lot of this work has been done earlier than that. But, I'll give you some, specific things that you can maybe make a response video on this. So I would love to see what you have to say about this. Nonetheless, let's move on. Yeah, so there is evidence of ancient metalwork, specifically with iron. And the iron actually has been found in this one specific Hopewell site. It's called Spruce Mound, I believe. Maybe I'm getting that wrong, but in Spruce Mound, there are furnaces basically all around the fortifications. This was an ancient fort done by the Hopewell Mound Builders. So yeah, there is evidence of ancient metalwork, and it's with this one particular mound. I believe it's called Spruce Mound. There's a gentleman by the name of William. I can't think of his name, but I can show it here in the video. Basically, he actually worked with another archaeologist, and they found evidence of metalwork. And the real, basically, the proof in the pudding for that was that there was this green slate or slate that was that's only can be made from doing metalwork that was found in these locations. And there was multiple, I think about 30 that this William had found with his senior archaeologist. And, it's pretty exciting. But, some of these, one of them was actually a iron cast where the iron still was connected to the cast. And I have a photo of it, and he shows it in a video as well. That's found and hidden in the Heartland, which is a video series of Book of Mormon evidence. So I'm not sure, James, if you did enough research, or maybe you just found this statement from the Smithsonian and you thought it'd be cool for content. But there, again, if you did a little bit more digging or just realization that, yeah, there's a lot of evidence. I'm not done yet. So we're just on number 5. I've got about 4 more to go. Number 6, there's a possibility that the spread of cultural traits across the Pacific to Mesoamerica and northwestern coast of South America began several hundred years before the Christian era. However, so it's nice that they acknowledge that there's a possibility. I'll show a little bit more than just a possibility. But here we go. They say, however, any such interhemispheric contacts appear to have been the results of accidental voyages originating in Eastern and Southern Asia. It is by means certain that even such contacts occurred. Certainly, there were no contacts with the ancient Egyptians, Hebrews, or other peoples of Western Asia and the Near East. Interesting that they say this, because again, it's been discovered that first off, that the Phoenicians were shipbuilders during the time of Zedekiah. But Nephi says that they didn't build ships the way that man did. So they must have had a different type of ship. Well, there is a British captain that actually built a Phoenician ship with a sail and had the plan to leave out of the Arabian Peninsula from the southeastern part of the peninsula and sail around Africa, all the way around Africa back to the Mediterranean. That was the plan. But when they actually took their voyage, they discovered that there was a current that actually would take them out across the ocean to the Gulf of Mexico. In fact, once they actually got to about the mid-Africa, they caught this current that they couldn't fight back. And according to his own words, they couldn't continue, or they couldn't actually turn around on this voyage, which they were kind of nervous about losing resources because of how long it was going to take their trip, until they got almost to the Dominican Republic. It was about to the Dominican Republic that they were finally able to turn around and then sail back to the Mediterranean as previously planned. So this proved that there was a current that could take an ancient group of people if they left east from the Mediterranean. Now, the Book of Mormon says that the Nephi and his family traveled east, but it doesn't say what their voyage or their trip was and what direction that they went. They were still on land when they were described to have gone east in their travels. So it's possible that by the time that they got to this land, I think was called Bountiful, and it's got an Arabian or at least Middle Eastern name, which is Bar Karat. I'm not sure if I'm not going to pronounce it right, but the fact is it's been identified, and it's got everything that has been described in the Book of Mormon as far as a location of where they could have been. And I believe that they went around Africa and went across the Atlantic. So as far as voyages go, that's really interesting. Now, specifically when it says Egyptians and Hebrews and other peoples, well, Tennessee, I'm so excited about Tennessee, but Tennessee has been said to have a lot of Egyptian influence. In fact, there was an Egyptian temple found in Tennessee that is very interesting and now currently at the bottom of a dam. So unfortunately, we can't go see it, but we have photos. And it's interesting, if you ever look at Solomon's temple and the fact that the Jews or the Israelites have a history of having spent, I think, maybe 400 years in Egypt, there is going to be some influence from Egypt. I have a more explanation on that, but I just want to touch on the fact that there has been archaeology discovered of Egyptian influence in North America. Central and South America, I'm not so sure. But North America, absolutely. And just like Nephi said, everything happened right here. In fact, when Nephi describes building the temple, it's after he goes north to separate from his brothers. So they settle. In fact, the oldest Hopewell site is actually found in Florida, suggesting that they sailed into the Gulf of Mexico. In fact, just to add, Nephi describes that when they got, before they find the promised land, they actually go in through, like what's described, what for me, having been a Floridian, seems like a Floridian hurricane, because they're seeing the rains, they're seeing the storm, they're seeing the waters change, and they're somewhere either in the Gulf of Mexico or by Cuba or the Dominican Republic. They are right in the middle of what sounds like a hurricane somewhere in the Gulf of Mexico or in those waters in the Caribbean. Now, other people from the other side, or people from the other side of LDS archaeology that believe it's happened in Central and South America, there is a possibility that it could be along the Central and South America. But I have a lot of confidence to say that not only did it happen in the Caribbean or the Gulf of Mexico, but the fact that the oldest Hopewell site or mounds are found in Florida suggests to me that they landed somewhere in Florida and they began to, settle there, and they spread, northward, as Nephites or in the book are described to have done multiple times in the Book of Mormon. And then again, Nephi says himself that he goes northward to separate from his brothers, and he then builds a temple. And again, there is a perfect spot for where that temple is located, right from where the oldest Hopewell mound is. So again, and there's other works that have been done by archaeologists from the 1800s. In fact, there's a lot of really great work that I can't pronounce his name, but I think the Squire or Ephraim Squire, I think that's maybe him and another person. They both worked for the Smithsonian. Interestingly enough, I don't know why the Smithsonian didn't mention this. In fact, this is one of the first, I would say, archaeological evidences of the Book of Mormon done by the Smithsonian that they're not being really intellectually honest about, because when you really put two and two together, but I get it, many Latter-day Saints on the other side of LDS archaeology have said for many years that it's happened in Central and South America, but maybe with this new evidence being represented back to the Smithsonian, they might consider that, maybe this does align, and maybe they might spend a little bit of money or time. Well, they're not Latter-day Saints and they're not Christian, but, let's cross our fingers, maybe they will, and actually do additional research on all this evidence. So there's this map that actually shows all of the red dots relating to locations of Hopewell mounds and city sites. And there's millions of them. And some people might think that, this is hilarious. It's not possible that there was an ancient civilization that covered the land, but here's the map. It actually shows it right here. And it's kind of undeniable. In fact, I'd say it's irrefutable. Okay, let's continue. No reputable Egyptologist or other specialist on the Old World archaeology, and no expert on New World prehistory has discovered or confirmed any relationships between archaeological remains in Mexico and archaeological remains in Egypt. Well, it's interesting because the Book of Mormon doesn't say that the people were Egyptian. So I'm not sure why you're looking in Egypt or acknowledging Egypt, but again, Tennessee has been suggested to have a lot of Egyptian influence. And I will mention some other controversial, and I only can say they're controversial. I only can say they're controversial because there's just not been enough time and attention given to other basically artifacts found in North America. But there's relics called the Michigan relics. There's also the Burroughs Cave artifacts. Now, some people might hear those words and dismiss them right away. And I think there's some good reason, because unfortunately for Burroughs Cave, the person who found it, Russell Burroughs, I actually have a video and a friend who's interviewed Russell, and I might be saying his name wrong, but still, it's hard to have all of this offhand, memorized. I just know basically all the references because I've made videos about it. Nonetheless, he has not been willing to share the actual location, and now he's so old that unfortunately he wouldn't be able to remember it even if he wanted to. He has shared the location with some people that he's trusted, but even they doubt, unfortunately, the actual location of where this Burroughs Cave is. The story behind it, without being too long-winded, is that he was, I guess, living his life on a regular day, and I think at some point he fell within some sort of underground cavern or tunnel or cave and found these artifacts in them. Now, the reason why he doesn't want to tell people the actual location is because whenever he did show them to so-called professionals or archaeologists, they were presented or suggested to be fakes right away. And that frustrated him because, he actually did have the location. Now, I'm not sure why he wouldn't spend a little bit more time, but he was a war veteran, and sometimes, not that there's anything against that, but the fact is sometimes people, of a certain age will be a little less trusting, especially of the government. So, that it is what it is. The artifacts have been examined, they have been available, and I think at some point they were sold and now are in part of private collections. And that's another challenge with this side of LDS archaeology, which is called the Heartland. The fact is that a lot of this evidence has been put in private collections. A lot of people just basically keep it for themselves. They don't give it to the government or to museums. And, they prize them as, unique treasures. But at some point, I think the Lord will definitely make it a lot easier for us to really learn more about the history of this land. There is also the Michigan relics. The Michigan relics have been considered to be fakes because of two individuals, Daniel Soper and James Scottford. Both of those, and I only remember their names because I've made enough videos about them that I can remember them. But basically, James Scottford was, I think, in 1889, found his first Michigan relic. But other people around Michigan counties were finding these relics since 1812 or 1811. So the thing here is that Scottford and also Soper were, they eventually, after about 10 years, they did meet after the first one that was found by Scottford. The Michigan relic was found by Scottford. Soper and Scottford partnered to make fakes. Unfortunately, they weren't replicas. They were basically just recreating their own versions. And, when you look at them, you can identify some of them as fakes. What's interesting about how they got discovered as fakes is, one, they would go to different towns and they would get someone, because I guess the people who actually looked at the authentic or potentially fake artifacts, they wouldn't really give it any time of day. So the thing about the Michigan relics is that what makes them really interesting is not only were they conspiring to make fakes, instead of replicas, James Talmage, who is a former apostle during the 1800s, also a geologist, was presented these same relics. And he was able to, with a lot more archaeological experience, discovered that the way that they were presented was absolutely fake and definitely a scam, because they would take these professionals or, these officials from each town, and they would bring them to a location, and they would say, hey, do you mind if we dig here? And then they would agree it'd be fine, and then go ahead and dig, and they'd say, hey, we found something, and then they'd let that official, like the mayor or the sheriff, go ahead and dig it up themselves, as if it was an experience for them. But Talmage was smarter than this, and he was able to discover that, hey, well, if there was an artifact here, there should be others in the area. So he would go back to the location by night or some other time, and he would continue to dig, and he found nothing. And so then he just basically wrote off all of the Michigan relics, or at least, Soper and Scotford. And the funny thing about this is the reason why you can't really let these go is because, again, these artifacts had been found as early as 1812 or 1811, the earliest ones being reported, and that was long before Scotford or Soper were even born. So, you can't really let those go. And I have a friend who actually has learned, he's been studying for 40 years character-based languages, and he knows Egyptian. And so he's been actually translating and working on the Michigan relics. He's also been working with the Burroughs Caves artifacts as well. So that's pretty exciting. And I can direct you to his channel in the description below. So let's go ahead and continue. So number 8, reports of finding of ancient Egyptian, Hebrew, and other Old World writings in the New World in pre-Columbian context have frequently appeared in newspapers, magazines, and sensational books. None of these claims has stood up to examination by reputable scholars. No inscriptions using Old World forms of writing have been shown to have occurred in any part of the Americas before 1492, except for a few Norse runestones which have been found in Greenland. Now, this is absurd, and I will say that because the Smithsonian, out of any organization or any group of people, would know the truth on this. And I say that because of the Bat Creek Stone. In fact, the Bat Creek Stone, found in the 1800s, was found on a Smithsonian dig, an early Smithsonian dig. There were 3 Native American burial mounds, and on the 3rd mound, it was actually uncovered under the head of some remains. And so the remains actually had some wood fragments, some bracelets, and then this stone. This stone was thought originally to be Paleo-Cherokee, as if it was like a written Cherokee writing. It was logged, it was tested a little bit, and then it was put in a box. Now, interesting, they did date the basically the wood fragments, and they dated it to be 32 AD all the way to about 700 AD as well. So the time of Christ, basically, 33 years after, 33 years up until, about 700. So it's within this time. And then afterward, what happened was, after some years of being logged and put in a box and nearly forgotten, there was a lady by Henrietta Mertz who worked for the American government as a code breaker. She recognized some of the symbols to be Semitic, and she brought them to the leading expert that worked for the Smithsonian to maybe identify what the characters were. When they were brought to that expert, Cyrus Gordon, or Gordon Cyrus, basically they were brought to this linguist, and he identified that they weren't Cherokee, and it was actually logged upside down to be Paleo-Hebrew. Paleo-Hebrew, found on a little rock in Tennessee under some remains in a mound. Native American mound, Paleo-Hebrew. This is all recorded or had been recorded by the Smithsonian. There was a whole legal battle about getting these remains and also getting this rock back to Native Americans. It was the Cherokee tribe that fought for this. And for number 8 to not acknowledge this is absolutely absurd, because even though that it says here that reputable scholars, this gentleman worked for the Smithsonian. In fact, after he translated it, they said that they couldn't believe it, and they said that he couldn't be believed because he was a Democrat. Can you believe that? Now, this is the story of it, and unfortunately, there's not enough attention given to these details that we can get all the facts. So I would like to learn a lot more about not just the person that translated it, but Henrietta Martz has a book called The Mystic Symbol. She's written this book where she's identified the same symbol, which looks like cuneiform, that's on a lot of these Michigan relics. It's on many of the artifacts that have been found in North America, and it seems to be an early form of Hebrew. This Hebrew actually translates to say Yod He Va, the same way that Jews pronounce the name of God. So, and the thing about Native Americans is certain tribes actually speak this word once a year, only once a year, and that's how sacred and special it is to some of these tribes. But again, it's just looks like a couple scratchings on each one of these types of artifacts. So this is not intellectually honest. This is the Smithsonian. This has all been done with the Smithsonian. They found this stuff and then they deny it or do not acknowledge it. And then they basically throw their own people under the bus. The reason why this stone, the Bat Creek stone, is so important is because although it's been dismissed by a number of experts, so-called experts, there is one individual, a geologist, a forensic geologist by the name of Scott Walter, that's actually confirmed this with the help of a former Smithsonian senior archaeologist, Jefferson Chapman. So Scott Walter has a video on YouTube all about this, and I've made videos as well, reviewing it. And yes, this is the Scott Walter that has been a part of the, History Channel, America Unearthed. Even though that version of that story is sensationalized and, not accurate to what actually happened, the YouTube video I can link in the description below is the actual story. In fact, he shares it twice in 2 separate videos. Basically, Scott Walter with a team and under the observation of Jefferson Chapman, who is basically managing a museum, took in an SEM, a certain type of microscope. And this microscope was able to look very closely to the Bat Creek stone. Scott Walter identified that through some photos, old photos of the Bat Creek stone, and also the records of the Smithsonian, that the rock, the Bat Creek stone, when it first was found, it had the inscription on the front, also a cross on the front, and then basically Emmerich had just, or I might have been Thomas that actually described making a scratch on the back of the rock, which was identified by Scott Walter. Then later, a new photograph of the stone had 2 new etchings on the front. There's not a lot of great photos of this, but basically you can still identify the history of this rock through some of these images. And those 2 scratches were made. Those are brand new scratches. And that's where Scott Walter was able to identify that something's up with this rock, and that he could confirm basically when and what the rock actually is. And so he took the SEM, the microscope, and scanned it and made basically 3D scans of this, and was able to identify that the original engravings on the rock had basically, nothing in them. And the reason why this is significant is because the scratches on the front of the rock made by the Smithsonian had foreign material in it, suggesting that whatever they used to make those scratches on the front of the rock, whatever they used left foreign material. And the foreign material basically dates because it was logged, or it can be identified as being within the hands of the Smithsonian. But the original inscription, which was as clean as a whistle, according to Scott's words, had nothing in there, no foreign material. So it suggests that those original inscriptions were as old or older than the time that it was found by Emmerich and Thomas in the early Smithsonian dig. And that's what confirms the Bat Creek Stone as being within the time frame of 32 AD to 700 AD. That is the most definitive, irrefutable evidence of Hebrew people living in North America, and was found in one of the mounds in Tennessee, the state that has the most Egyptian influence, and also among a mound that was not built by Native Americans. Again, because the Seneca tribe said that they did not make the mounds. It was an older group of people that knew arts that the Seneca did not know, according to Cornstalk. So that is probably the longest story I have to share here. Let's read this last one. There are copies of the Book of Mormon in the library of the National Museum of Natural History, Smithsonian Institution. So I guess they're basically, doing a mic drop there, or basically saying that, hey, if you want to read about this fictional tale, you can go ahead and read about it in the Smithsonian because we have old books, but there's a problem again with this because they've just gone ahead and shared all this stuff. So like I was saying, all you have to do is prove that there were ancient peoples here that did have all of these things. In fact, let me put it this way. Something that's interesting about some of this archaeology and artifacts that have been left behind is, first off, there is a city site that was found by a Smithsonian again that was surveyed to have a menorah inside the city walls and the outside being shaped like a Hebrew oil lamp. There are also some other ancient symbols that have been identified, like a compass and square. Then there are some other artifacts, like going back to the Michigan relics, that show a group of people that seem like they are clothed with armor, while the others look like they are at least bare-chested and with feathers on their heads, as if they were headdresses. Then you have the mystic symbol on many of these artifacts, and then you also have other symbols that look like they're some form of not Hebrew but Egyptian. And it's very interesting because the Book of Mormon describes that if they could write in Hebrew, then basically there would be no imperfections in their writing. But then on the flip side, you have the Reformed Egyptian that was said by Joseph Smith to be how the plates were written. And Nephi knew all the language of his father. You got to go into, who was Lehi who taught Nephi this language. But, that's probably for another video. Then you have other artifacts that look like weapons, again with the mystic symbol on some of them. And you also have armor, breastplates, head plates, arm shields that have been all found in Hopewell mounds, with, again, this early form of cuneiform Hebrew written on many of them. And then you also have altars, interesting altars that have been shaped with natural stones, just like some that have been found in the Middle East. You also have swords, specifically looking like swords that were made with, I can't say Damascus steel, but definitely in the same fashion as swords from the Middle East. So here is just a few, and honestly, I've already been going on pretty long on archaeology of Book of Mormon people living in America. But maybe James, if you're watching this still, I'd love to get to meet you. I'd be happy to show you even more than this. And I'll tell you that early on in the church, there were some people that really hated all of the basically angst or fighting or persecution that they were getting as saints in Missouri and Ohio and New York, that some people, when they found any kind of evidence of an ancient civilization, they got excited and decided, let's go ahead and place the Book of Mormon in Central and South America. And some of those people, one in particular, that actually was responsible for some of the news publications of the early saints, he was a big reason why these people, these early saints, identified it in Central and South America. But I'm going to say that, as more and more is discovered and as more and more is become basically made aware, I think many Latter-day Saints are going to basically adopt the idea that, hey, there's a lot more in North America that hasn't been considered yet. I will say, too, that, what's important to understand is that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints members have been researching in Central and South America for years. And I agree with them. They probably haven't found very much that's convincing. Even Hugh Nibley at one point, who's a Latter-day Saint, early Latter-day Saint scholar, has suggested that after going down to Central and South America, that there was a lot of nothing that he found. There are other archaeologists that are of the Latter-day Saint faith that have left the church. And even modern times, there are many Latter-day Saints that just won't look at anything else because they think that it's all in Central and South America. But North American research, there's only been about 1% that's been done. And I've been able to show all of these artifacts. And again, I promise you, there are more that I wouldn't be able to fit into this video, or it'd be just too long, that have actually been found in North America. So I'm excited to share that, hey, yeah, there is archaeological evidence, just like that of the Bible. And I celebrate with you and any other Christian out there, that loves the fact that we can go to the tomb of the Savior. We can now see where the ark has been, Noah's ark. And we can also rejoice in the fact that the Ark of the Covenant has been found. And amazingly enough, has been found right under the place where Christ was crucified. I celebrate with you. And you know what? Honestly, if this has at all opened your eyes, I will, suggest that you take a little bit more time to look at the evidence that I've shared with you. And yes, there are plenty of critics that are against this archaeology and artifacts that I've presented in here. But remember, they're not Christian. Many of them are not. Now, I wish I had said more about evolution. And, again, this is for probably another video. But I would just remind you that, and anybody that's watching this, that you don't want to really take everything that these so-called experts say, especially if you are of a Christian faith and believe in God and believe that God created Adam and Eve, and that we all come from Adam and Eve, and that there was a worldwide flood. I wouldn't take everything from these so-called experts as truth, but rather more with a grain of salt. So if you don't know much about me and my story, I would recommend that you watch this video right here to learn how I came across the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and how I ended up joining the church, because it wasn't by feelings and, or at least feelings alone. And it wasn't by any kind of indoctrination or any kind of teaching of the church. It was solely by a dream that it had from God.